Hello everyone, it's Claire back again with our English 11 Plus course. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is probably one of the most important aspects of getting through the 11 Plus exam with the maximum number of points. And that is the correct way to answer a comprehension question that has more than one part. So this is first of all about recognizing what the question is asking us to do. It's about putting together an answer that will give the information that we need. And thirdly, it's about how to word our answer, our response, in such a way that the examiner can see that we know what we're talking about. So it's a complex set of skills. And actually what we're looking at here, and I'm just going to share my screen with you. What we're going to look at today is a comprehension question like this. And it's question 5. How does the author create a sense of mystery and suspense in the description of Jack's journey? So what we've got here is an 11 plus comprehension question that is actually looking ahead to the skill set that students are going to need in GCSE and even beyond. So it's actually a deceptively simple question, and we need to be aware of what we're being asked to do. Because what we're doing now is developing the higher order thinking skills that schools are looking for when they are marking your 11 plus papers. So let's look at the first part of the question. How does the author create? So this one needs to be written in bold in your notebooks if you're keeping notes. Any question that starts with the words, how does the author, is looking for language techniques and literary devices. So what we are being asked to discuss here are literary techniques and language techniques. So we're being asked specifically to look in the text for things like imagery, simile, metaphor, personification, alliteration, hyperbole, juxtaposition, or all those techniques that we need to be able to recognize in a text, and also that we need to be able to use ourselves in our own creative writing. So point number 1, and this is really important, any question in literature that starts with the words, how does the author, is asking us to look for techniques and literary devices. Okay, so now we know what we're looking for. Let's keep going, because the other thing we need to think about when we're doing an exam is we're very likely to read very quickly and to feel this impulse to get something down on paper as quickly as possible. And this is where a lot of serious mistakes happen in exams. So this isn't just about knowledge, it's also about strategy. It's about keeping control of your situation when you're in an exam context and you might be feeling nervous. So let's remember that the question basically has 3 parts here. How does the author? So we've now decided that we're looking for language techniques and literary devices. But what specifically is the author creating? A sense of mystery and suspense. So we'll come on to that later as I go through the text and show you what is meant here. But then the third and also very important part, in the description of Jack's journey. So we're not being asked to comment on the whole of the extract, the whole of the text. We're being asked to comment on a specific segment of the text. So to answer the question correctly, we're going to need to keep those, we're sort of juggling three balls here in the air, and this is where it starts to get complex and where we need a process to keep us on track. Okay. So how does the author create a sense of mystery and suspense in the description of Jack's journey? So I'm going to start actually with the way I would word the opening of my response. The best way to start a response to a question like this is to rephrase the question in your answer. So the tendency in an exam under pressure will be to dive in somewhere and say the author uses a simile here or a metaphor there, or is using juxtaposition here. But that's not what I would advise, because it's very easy if you just dive in with the first thing that comes into your head. It's very easy to get lost and lose focus and forget to answer the whole question. So my advice is to start your answer by rephrasing the question. And how would we do that? The author creates a sense of mystery and suspense in the description of Jack's journey by using this technique, that technique, and that technique. So what I would do in my opening sentence is rephrase the question and then do a short list of, let's say, 3 techniques or devices that the author has used. This is an exam question, so you're not being asked to write a book. So you can pick 3 at the most, 3 techniques or devices that the author uses to create a sense of mystery and suspense. Okay. So now we've sort of got our heads around what the question is doing. Let's scroll up to the text itself and look at what it says. So we're looking at the passage describing Jack's journey, which is what I've just highlighted here. So first of all, when you've decided which part of the text is relevant to your answer, you could mark it with a pencil on your exam paper. I've highlighted it here because obviously we're online. Or you could also just take a highlighter pen and just draw a line down the part of the text that's relevant. So this will prevent you from putting in quotations that aren't part of the remit of the question. So you're not being asked to comment on the whole text. You're being asked to comment on these 4 paragraphs. Okay, so our remit then is to look for language techniques that the author is using to create an atmosphere of tension and suspense. Okay, so let's see how he or she does that. So the first thing we've got is a mist. So in mystery writing, the author will very often use strange effects of the light to create an atmosphere of mystery or suspense. And there are 2 ways that they typically do that. One is by setting the story or the passage at night, and the other is to use mist. So here, if we look at this passage, starting with one evening, the author here has used both to typical techniques that are used by authors to create a sense of mystery. He's setting the passage at night in moonlight, so that creates an atmosphere of mystery. And he's also using the mist that he started using right at the top of the passage, in fact, in the very first sentence. But the mist is very important to this passage because it's creating an atmosphere. So the first thing I would think about then would be the fact that the setting is at night and the use of mist. So the setting is mysterious. This is then emphasized by the use of adjectives such as eerie. So the use of the adjective again reinforces the idea that the atmosphere is mysterious and a bit sinister. Then I would say there are different things you could use, but I would look at this sentence. Jack's heart raced with excitement and fear. So what are we looking at here? It's a show, not tell. So the author is showing us how excited Jack is by describing his heart as racing. Well, of course, a heart can't race because it doesn't move. So what we've got here is a metaphor, the use of a metaphor to describe Jack's excitement and fear. So he's a curious boy. He's very excited to find out what's on the island, but he's also rather scared, as one would expect. Okay, so that would be my second point, possibly. Then it's worth bearing in mind, if we're looking for literary techniques and literary devices, it's worth looking at the sentence structure and the paragraph structure. If we look at these paragraphs on the page, we can see that the paragraphs are quite short. So in general, short paragraphs are used by authors when the writing is meant to be action focused. So as in adventure story like this one, and very long paragraphs tend to be typical for writers who are using a lot of description. Now, of course, you can get passages in one text that are a mixture, but what we've got here is a children's adventure story, so it's natural that the author would be using short, action-based paragraphs, and the description is kept very short and economical. So he's not interrupting the action with lots of description. Here we've got an interesting, very short sentence at the end of a paragraph that's also very short. He had found it. When we get a very short sentence like that, we are meant to stop as a reader and sort of take a breath, pause, and think about what's happening. Up to this point, Jack has been setting out looking for a mysterious island, which he wasn't even sure existed. Now he's found it. That line comes at the end of a paragraph, and it's a marker showing the end of his search and the beginning of his description of the island. So short sentences like that, especially if they're on a one-liner paragraph on their own, are a marker in the text to show the reader that we've come to the end of one thing and we're moving into the beginning of the next phase. So we should expect now the writing to be about what is on the island. And here it is. Now, we should keep in mind, we're thinking about mystery, suspense, and tension. So not unsurprisingly, we have the word mysterious used as part of the description of the island. So we had the adjective eerie up here, here we've got the adjective mysterious. So we can see that the author is consistently using vocabulary that emphasizes mystery and suspense. Let's look at the visual description of what he finds on the island. Ancient trees with twisted branches loomed over the shore. So the picture of the trees is twisted. It's rather sinister, isn't it? And the air was thick with the scent of unknown flowers. So the unknown again emphasizes the air of mystery in the passage. All he's got to go by is moonlight, so he can't see very clearly. This is again, as I mentioned earlier, a typical technique used by writers to emphasize an atmosphere of mystery and suspense. So all he's got is moonlight. Always worth looking at the verbs that a writer is using, because a good writer will use verbs that give the reader a sense of atmosphere as well as just the information about what's happening. So instead of saying he walked upon ruins, we have he stumbled. So walking is just neutral. I'm putting one foot in front of the other. It doesn't tell me anything about atmosphere or suspense or mystery. But stumbling definitely reinforces the idea that he can barely see what's happening and he's not in control of himself in this atmosphere and in this environment. So stumbling again reinforces the mystery and the suspense. The idea of ruins also adds to the air of mystery. What was this old settlement? Who lived there? What's happened to it? So the idea of ruins again adds to the mystery because we've got an unexplained set of ruins. Okay. In the center of the island, Jack discovered a large ornate chest partially buried in the ground. He hesitated. So he's listened to the stories about the island that the villagers were telling, and he still has the fear in him. That hesitation is an expression of suspense and the idea that he doesn't really know what he's dealing with. He remembers the stories of mythical creatures guarding the treasures. So again, mystery and suspense. Summoning his courage. So we see Jack, the author is showing us here how Jack, the main character, is having to overcome his own fear all the time in order to keep going. So if you're not fearful, then you don't need to summon your courage, do you? And at the end of this paragraph, a series of symbols Jack didn't recognize. Okay, so again, mystery, something unexplained, something unknown. So as you can see, if we move carefully through the passage, looking for things that we're going to use to answer the question, you will always have a choice of things that you can use. But I wouldn't recommend using all of them because you don't have time and it's not necessary. So let's just flick back to question 5. Mystery and suspense. How does the author create a sense of mystery and suspense? So what we now need to do is to decide which 3 items we're going to choose. I think this one is good. When we're choosing quotations, try to keep them to no more than a sentence and preferably a phrase or two. I've chosen two here because the mist reminds us of the atmosphere of the unknown, and the village lights fading behind him remind us that Jack is now on his own, which I think is very important to the suspense of the story and the feeling that he's quite afraid, even though he's excited. So I would use that as a quotation. And I would probably add the word eerie as a way of saying the author's deliberately using vocabulary that emphasizes mystery and suspense. Jack's heart raced with excitement and fear is a good quotation. It's a short sentence and it's using a metaphor. So here you can show off your knowledge that you recognize what a metaphor is. Okay. And let's just pick one more. Maybe ancient trees with twisted branches, because that's a visual image that is descriptive of a place that seems rather frightening. But you could pick something else. You might want to pick summoning his courage, or you might want to pick the stories of mythical creatures. Yes, so that's how we do it. If I go back to the question then, I'm going through this very slowly because I want you to see how and why this is a question that involves what we call higher order thinking skills, which is exactly what the 11+ exam is actually designed to find in a student. That's what we're looking for, the potential for higher order thinking. It's not just about finding information. It's about understanding and inferring what that information means. And it's also about understanding why a writer has made particular choices in the way that they've written something. So, as I mentioned earlier, I would answer this question like this. I would rephrase the question along these lines. The author creates a sense of mystery and suspense in the description of Jack's journey by referring to mist and darkness in the setting, and then you could have your quotation, by using vocabulary such as eerie, and by emphasizing the visually frightening appearance of the island in the ancient trees twisted in the looming darkness. Yes, so that's how I would do it. So when we come to writing out the answer, number one, we rephrase the question in our response. Why do we do that? We do that so that we keep our response completely focused on what the question is asking. And then immediately after rephrasing the question, we're going to name 2 or 3 techniques that the writer uses. And this is very important, have quotations to back up our answer. Okay, so that's how to answer a complex comprehension question. And what we've just looked at here is a typical question in English literature that will keep getting more complex as we move up the school. And you get very similar questions in GCSE. So this is a question that we need to learn how to answer well and to understand exactly what's being asked for. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. We will keep revisiting that practice, that, shall I say, technique for answering the question, because it does take practice. And in our live sessions, we can work through this and practice it so that you will feel much more confident about it. So more about that later. Thank you for listening, and I hope it was helpful. See you in the next one.